A horse hit the dirt hard. Hooves cracked against ground that had not seen rain in months. A woman tumbled from the saddle. Her shoulder struck a rock. Her body rolled twice and stopped. Blood ran into the dust. She did not cry out. She did not move. The sun beat down on her face. She tried to breathe and could not. She tried to lift her head and could not. 3 days she had run. 3 days without water. 3 days with a wound in her side that would not close. Her hand pressed against the wet warmth at her ribs. Her eyes closed. She made her peace with what was coming. She waited for the end. Her name was Nayeli, and what happened in the next 12 hours changed 2 lives forever. The cowboy who found her was not what anyone expected. Stay with me on this one. 3 days before that fall, she had walked out of a Comanchero camp with a stolen knife in her belt and her brother's horse waiting in a draw a mile to the south. She was not supposed to leave. The trader she was promised to had paid in rifles and powder. 12 good rifles. Enough to make a man like Cyrus Doyle a king on the southern plains. Doyle did not lose what he bought. Nayeli had been 5 months in that camp. She had watched her father die in the raid that took her. She had watched her younger sister sold to a freighter heading west. She had not cried for either of them because in her people you do not cry until the work is done. The work in her mind was getting out. So one night she cut a tent rope, slipped past a drunk guard, and ran. Doyle's men came after her by sunup. The chase took 3 days across country that did not forgive anyone. The horse went lame on the 2nd day. She killed a rabbit with a thrown rock and ate it raw because a fire would have brought them. On the 3rd day, a Comanchero scout caught her near a dry creek and put a bullet in her side before she put a knife in his throat. She rode on. By the time her horse went down for good, she had lost more blood than a body can spare. Her hands were sticky with it. Her vision was going pale at the edges. That is how she came to be lying in the dust with her eyes closed. Now here's where the second life enters this story. A man named Caleb Reyes was riding the eastern fence line of a small cattle outfit 40 miles from the nearest town. He was 34 years old, half Mexican on his mother's side, half Anglo on his father's. He had been alone on that ranch for 2 winters now, ever since fever took his wife and the baby she was carrying. He had not spoken to another human being in 19 days, and that human being had been a peddler who came up the road to sell him a pot. Caleb saw the buzzards first, 6 of them circling low. In that country, buzzards meant a calf was down, or a coyote had made a kill, or a man had finally given up. He turned his horse off the fence line and rode toward them. What he found stopped him cold. He had seen dead men before. He had seen wounded men. He had buried his own wife with his own hands. But he had never seen a woman lying in the open desert with a bullet hole in her side and her face turned toward the sky like she was listening for something. He swung down. He knelt beside her. She was Apache. He could see that in the cut of her dress, in the beadwork, in the silver wire that held her hair back. He could also see she was breathing, but barely. He did the math fast. The nearest town was a day's ride. The nearest doctor was 3. She would not last either trip. She might not last the hour. He could ride on. A lot of men in that country would have. A wounded Apache woman was not a problem most cowboys wanted to bring home. There were neighbors who would shoot her on sight just for what her people had done to other people, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, on lands neither he nor she had been alive to see. Caleb reached down, lifted her into his arms, and walked her to his horse. Her head fell against his shoulder. He felt something warm and wet soak through his shirt. He felt a small hard thing press against his collarbone. A piece of obsidian on a sinew cord around her neck, no bigger than a coin. He did not know yet what it meant. He would later. Among her people, an obsidian pendant cut in that shape was a mourning piece. Said, "I have lost everything. I am already a ghost." He tied her wrists loosely so she would not slip if she came to and panicked. He rode the 8 miles back to his cabin slower than he wanted to, because every jolt of the horse made her cry out without waking up. When he laid her on his bed, the only bed in that one-room house, he did not yet know her name. He did not know what was chasing her either, but he was about to find out. The first thing Nayeli felt was a pillow. That was wrong. A pillow under her head should not exist. She had closed her eyes on bare ground. The ground had been hot. This was soft and cool and smelled like clean linen. She opened her eyes. A wood ceiling low. A lantern hanging from a peg. A wool blanket pulled to her chin. Sunlight coming through a small square window with the shutter half closed. She did not know this place. She did not know how she was breathing. She tried to sit up. Pain flashed up her side and dropped her flat again. Her hand went under the blanket and found a clean strip of cloth wrapped tight around her ribs. Stitched. Someone had stitched her. A chair scraped on the floor. She froze. She turned her head slowly. A man was sitting 6 feet from the bed in a wooden chair. His hands were on his knees, palms open and turned up, the way a person shows another person they are not holding a weapon. He was big through the shoulders. Dark hair, sunburned skin, a few days of beard. He wore a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. There was no gun on him. The gun was on a peg by the door, 10 feet away. He spoke first. His voice was low and even, like a man speaking to a horse he did not want to spook. "You're safe," he said. "You hear me? Safe." She did not answer. She did not move her eyes off his hands. He waited. When she did not speak, he tried again, slower. He used 3 Apache words. The pronunciation was bad, but the words were right: water, sleep, no harm. Her eyes flicked to his face, then back to his hands. He stood up slowly. He walked to a small table by the stove. He picked up a tin cup. He filled it from a clay jar. He carried it to her. He stopped 2 feet from the bed and set the cup on a stool within her reach. Then he stepped back. She watched him for a long count. He did not move. After a while, her own thirst won. Her hand came out from under the blanket and reached for the cup. She drank in small sips, slow, the way she had been taught when blood was lost. Half the cup was enough. She set it back down. "My name is Caleb," he said. "Caleb Reyes. This is my house. You're hurt. I patched you up. Anything you need, I'll get." She studied him. Her eyes were dark and steady, and she did not blink. "Nayeli," she said. The word was rough in her throat. It had been days since she had said anything out loud. He nodded once. He did not smile. He did not ask anything else. That was the first hour. "Now I want to tell you something about how a wound heals when you've made up your mind to die. It does not heal the way a wound does on a body that wanted to live. The body is confused. It does not know whether to mend or to let go." Nayeli's body, for the first 3 days she lay in that bed, could not decide. She slept in long stretches. She woke in panic. Twice she woke and did not know where she was and grabbed for a knife that was no longer at her hip, and Caleb, who slept on a bedroll on the floor by the stove, would sit up and say low, "Easy. You're safe. Easy." She would lie back down and stare at the ceiling until her heart stopped pounding. He fed her broth from a wooden spoon when she was too weak to lift one. He changed the bandage on her side without ever uncovering more of her than he had to. He kept his eyes on her face when she was awake, and on the floor when he was working near the bed. He did not touch her except to bring water to her lips or to press a clean cloth against the wound. On the 4th day she could sit up. On the 5th she walked, slow, to the door, and stood holding the frame and looking out at his land. It was small, a barn, corral, 20 cattle in the long pasture beyond, a creek with cottonwoods, the mountains, far off, blue and quiet, no other house in any direction. He came up behind her, not too close. "You'll be steady on your feet in a few more days," he said. "Then you can decide what you want to do." She turned her head. "Decide? Stay. Go. Whatever you want." He paused. "I'm not keeping you." She looked back out at the land for a long time. That night, She sat at his small table for the first time and ate stew with her own hand. He sat across from her. The stove was warm. He had washed his face and combed his hair back. He looked, in that lamplight, like a man who was glad to have someone in his house, even a stranger, even an enemy. She found she was not afraid of him. This was strange to her. She had been afraid of every man she had seen for 5 months. She had been afraid of her own dreams. He poured her water without asking. He cut her bread without asking. He did not look at her body when she ate. He looked at her hands. "You're a good cook," she said in English. The words came out slow and careful. She had learned them years ago at a mission school and not used them in a long while. He laughed once, short. "It's just stew. Good stew." He laughed again. This time she almost laughed with him. She did not, but she almost did. Outside, the sun went down behind the mountains. The dogs in the barn settled. The wind dropped. Somewhere down the creek, a coyote called once and was answered. For the first time since the night she had cut the tent rope and run, Nayeli felt her shoulders come down from her ears. She finished her stew. She set down her spoon. She thought very quietly, in the back of her mind, "It is over. I am going to live." That was the night she let her guard down. The next morning was the morning the riders came. She was outside by the corral, standing in the early sun, brushing the mane of his bay horse with a piece of cloth. The wound in her side still pulled when she lifted her arm, but it pulled less every day. The mountains were pink. A jay was scolding something in the cottonwoods. Then she heard the hooves. 3 horses, coming up the wagon road from the south. Coming fast. She turned cold from the inside out. She knew that rhythm. She had heard it in her dreams for 5 months. Cyrus Doyle. She dropped the cloth. She stood frozen at the corral, one hand on the rail, watching the road. Caleb came out of the barn behind her. He saw her face. He looked down the road. He saw the dust. He did not run. He did not yell. He walked, calm, into the cabin, came back out with a Winchester rifle over his arm, and stood in his own front yard like a man who had been planning for this morning all his life. "Get in the house," he said. "Behind the stove. Stay low. Caleb. Now, Nayeli." She went. She crouched behind the iron stove and watched through the window crack as the 3 men came up. Doyle rode in the middle. White hat, sorrel horse with the bad leg, tall straight back. The 2 flanking him were Comancheros she did not know by name. They pulled up 40 feet from the cabin. Caleb did not raise the rifle. He held it across his body, casual, the way a man holds a fence post. But his thumb was on the hammer. "Morning," Doyle said. "Morning," Caleb said. "You alone out here, friend?" "I am." Doyle smiled. It was the kind of smile that made babies cry. "I'm hunting a runaway. Apache woman. Yatal. Wound in her side. Tracked her north for 3 days. Then lost her in those rocks. Buzzards put me on a trail that ends at your fence line." "Buzzards lie all the time," Caleb said. Doyle laughed. The 2 flankers did not. "Mister, I'm not here to argue. She's mine. I paid for her. I just want her back. Hand her over. No trouble. You go on with your morning. I haven't seen any Apache woman." "That right. That's right." There was a long pause. Doyle leaned on his saddle horn and looked Caleb up and down like a man pricing a horse. Then he looked past Caleb at the cabin. "Mind if we look around?" "I do. Friend. Don't be a fool." "I'm not your friend, mister, and I'm not a fool. You're on my land. You'll turn around and ride off it the same way you came on, and you'll do it now." The 2 flankers shifted in their saddles. Hands moved toward holsters. The thin one was quicker. Caleb's rifle came up before the thin one's hand cleared leather. "Don't," Caleb said. Nobody moved. For a long second, the only sound was a horse blowing. Then Doyle held up one hand, palm out, almost lazy. "Easy, boys. Easy." He looked at Caleb over the barrel of the Winchester. "All right, Cowboy. You win the morning. But I'll tell you something for free. I'll be back. With more men. And I will burn this little outfit of yours to the ground. And I will take what's mine. And I will leave you in the ash. You think on that today. I'll think on it. Doyle smiled again. Be seeing you, he said. He turned his horse. The flankers turned theirs. The three of them rode back down the road, slow at first, then faster until the dust came up and swallowed them. Caleb stood in the yard with the rifle until they were a mile gone. Then he lowered it. His hands were shaking. Now if you're still with me on this story, and I hope you are, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want more frontier stories like this one. Then come right back. Because what happened next was not what either of them expected. Inside the cabin, she came out from behind the stove. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. How many? He said. How many men does he have? 20. Maybe more. He runs a camp. He'll come back. He will come back. Caleb sat down hard in the wooden chair. He set the rifle across his knees. He stared at the wall. She took a breath. I will go, she said. He turned his head. I will leave tonight. On foot if I have to. I can be 10 miles from here by sunup. He will follow me. He will not burn your house if I am not in it. He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up. He set the rifle against the table. He walked over to her. He stopped about 3 feet away, the same distance he had kept the first day she woke up. Nayeli, he said. Listen to me. She did. He's not going to leave me alone now. He's not the kind of man who leaves witnesses, no matter who's in the house. You walking off into the desert tonight does not save me. It gets you killed and it gets me killed 2 days later. She did not answer. Also, he said quieter. I am not letting you walk off into the desert tonight. She looked at his face. Why? He did not answer right away. Then he said, because I already let one woman go when I should have stood at the door. I'm not doing it twice. The cabin was very quiet. Outside, the wind came up off the mesa and moved through the cottonwoods. Nayeli sat down in the chair across from him. They did not speak again that night until the sun came down. But when they did speak, it was about how to dig firing pits and where to position the horses and how many shells he had left. They were not strangers anymore. They were two people who had decided, without ever saying it out loud, to stand at the same door. Doyle came back 4 nights later. He came at moonrise, the way men who hunt other men like to come, when the light is enough to see but not enough to aim well. He had 6 men with him, 2 on the rise behind the cabin, 2 by the corral, Doyle and the scarred man at the front gate. Caleb and Nayeli had not slept much in those 4 days. He had taught her to load his second rifle. She had taught him 3 Apache phrases for behind you, to the left, and down. They had moved the cattle into the back pasture. They had filled every clay jar with water, in case the men set the roof on fire. They had dug a shallow pit by the back wall of the cabin where she could stand and shoot through a slit in the chinking. Caleb had cleaned his old Colt revolver. He had given Nayeli a knife that was not the one she had cut a tent rope with 5 months ago, but better. Bone handle. A blade you could split a man's shirt open with from a foot away. She had tucked it inside her belt and not taken it out since. When the hoofs came, Caleb was already at the front shutter. 6, she whispered. I count 6. 2 on the rise. I see them. He looked at her. Stay low, he said. You stay low. He almost smiled. The shooting started before either of them was ready. The 2 on the rise opened up first, and the wood by Caleb's head splintered into pieces that flew across the cabin. He dropped flat and crawled to the back. Nayeli had already dropped into her pit. The first crack of her rifle came from the back wall. She hit the man on the right side of the rise. He fell off his horse and did not get up. The fight lasted 9 minutes. 9 minutes is not long if you are watching a clock. It is forever if there are men trying to kill you. Caleb dropped one of the men by the corral with a shot through the throat. The scarred man got within 20 feet of the front door, and Caleb hit him twice in the chest before he hit the dirt. The second man on the rise put a bullet through the meat of Caleb's left shoulder. Caleb fell against the wall and did not lose the rifle. He fired again. He missed. He fired again. He didn't. Naeli took down the second man at the corral. That left one rider on the rise and Doyle. The rider on the rise broke. He turned his horse and ran. Caleb did not waste a bullet on him. He let him go. Doyle was not running. Doyle was off his horse. He was somewhere in the dark, behind the woodpile, and he was very, very quiet. Caleb. Naeli called from the back low. I'm hit. Bad. Shoulder. I can shoot. I can't move quick. Stay there. Naeli. But she was already moving. She came around the side of the cabin in the dark, the bone-handle knife in her hand, the rifle slung on her back. She did not make a sound. She had been trained, before her father died, to walk on rocks the way the wind walks on rocks. She put each foot down soft. She breathed through her nose. She found Doyle behind the woodpile. He was reloading. He looked up. His face changed when he saw her. Not afraid. Surprised. Like a man who had bought a horse and found out it could speak. Apache, he said. He came up fast with the pistol. She came up faster with the knife. The pistol fired into the dirt by her foot. The knife went into the side of his neck. He fell to one knee. He looked at her. His mouth opened. No sound came out. She pulled the knife free and stepped back and watched him go down on his face in the dust. She stood over him a long time. He had bought her with 12 rifles. He had told her, the first night in his camp, that she belonged to him until she died. He had told her, a week later, when she tried to run the first time, that the only way she would ever leave was as a body in a hole. He had been right about that. Just not about whose body. She wiped the knife on her sleeve and walked back to the cabin. Caleb was sitting against the back wall. His left side was wet and dark. His face was pale. The rifle was across his lap. He looked up when she came in. Doyle? Done. All of them. One ran. He let out a breath. She knelt beside him. She tore a clean strip from the bottom of her own dress and pressed it to his shoulder. He winced. She pressed harder. The bleeding slowed. I'll need needle and thread, she said. Like you did for me. In the box. Top shelf. By the lantern. She went and got it. She lit the lantern with her hands shaking, because hands shake after a fight no matter how steady they were during it. She threaded the needle on the second try. She knelt back down beside him and cut his shirt away from the wound with the same knife she had used 4 minutes ago to do something else. This will hurt, she said. I know. She started to stitch. He gritted his teeth and did not make a sound. When she was done, she tied off the thread. She wiped the wound clean with whiskey from his shelf. She wrapped it in a clean cloth. She sat down beside him on the floor with her back against the wall and her shoulder touching his shoulder. Outside, in the dirt, the men they had killed were starting to cool. Inside the cabin, neither of them spoke for a long time. She reached over with her hand and laid it flat over his good hand. He turned his palm up and folded his fingers around hers. That was all. That was enough. 2 of the men outside were still alive at sunup. Caleb had taken a bullet and Naeli had killed Cyrus Doyle, and they were both still bleeding into bandages. Neither of them had time to change properly, but they were not the kind of people who left wounded enemies in the dirt to suffer. They tied the 2 living men in the barn. They sent them out the next afternoon on foot, with their hands behind their backs, with the message that anybody who came back to this land would not get a second sunrise. The 2 men did not come back. The other man, the one who had run during the fight, did not come back either. Word went out in the southern trade camps that Cyrus Doyle had ridden up to a little ranch in the foothills with 6 men, and that none of those men had ridden home. Nobody ever came hunting Naeli again. That was the gift of finishing the work yourself. The wound in Caleb's shoulder healed clean. She watched it every day. She washed it. She changed the bandage. She made him broth he didn't need anymore, but she still wanted to give. By the third week, he could lift his arm over his head. By the fourth, he could swing an axe. Spring came up the valley slow and stubborn. The cottonwoods went from gray to gold to green. The creek rose. A pair of foals were born in the corral. Naeli watched the first one stand on shaking legs and made a sound in her throat that could have been a laugh or could have been something older. One morning, she walked up the rise behind the cabin alone. She carried a small hand spade. In her other hand, the obsidian pendant on its sinew cord. The little black stone that meant, "I have lost everything. I am already a ghost." She dug a small hole at the base of a juniper. She held the pendant in her palm a long minute. She thought about her father. She thought about her sister, who might still be alive somewhere out west, and might not. She thought about the girl she had been, who had walked out of a Comanchero camp expecting to die. She kissed the pendant once. She put it in the hole. She covered it. She walked back down the rise. Caleb was at the corral, brushing the bay. He looked up when she came down. "You all right?" "I am all right." She came up to the rail and stood close to him. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. You said the morning Doyle came that I could decide. Stay or go." "I remember. I have decided." He stopped brushing. He set the brush on the rail. He turned to face her. "You don't owe me anything, Naeli. You hear me? You don't owe me a thing. Not for the bed. Not for the bullet. None of it. If you decide to ride out tomorrow, I'll cut you a horse and a bedroll and 3 weeks of food, and I'll wave you off and I'll be glad I knew you." "I know. All right then. I am staying." He looked at her for a long count. "You sure?" "I am sure." "Why?" She smiled. It was the first full smile she had given him. "Because I closed my eyes to die," she said. "And I woke up in your bed, and I thought it was a mistake. I thought somebody was going to come and tell me I had to go back. Nobody came. And every day since, I have looked at this land, and at you, and I have thought, maybe it was not a mistake. Maybe I was not done." He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, very quiet, "You weren't done." "No. Me neither. I know." He took her hand over the corral rail. He did not pull her closer. He did not need to. They stood there in the spring sun, holding hands across a piece of split cedar, while the foal in the corral nosed his mother and the bay flicked his tail and a hawk made a long, slow circle over the cottonwoods. That night, she did not sleep on her side of the bed. She lay against his good shoulder, with his arm under her head, and she closed her eyes. She closed them the same way she had closed them in the dust, 3 months and a lifetime ago. The same eyes, the same woman. But this time, when she closed them, she was not making her peace with the end. She was going to sleep beside the man who had given her a beginning. And outside, in a country that had taken almost everything from her, the wind moved soft through the cottonwoods, and a coyote called once down the creek and was answered.